She gave me her last bread. Now she's gone, the child told the stranger. The child's bare feet made no sound on the warped planks of the general store porch. Dust clung to the stranger's boots like prayer, and the child stared at those boots before looking up. She gave me her last bread. The words fell flat in the afternoon heat. Now she's gone. The stranger's hand paused on the door handle. Something about the child's hollow eyes made him turn around completely. A torn piece of faded yellow cloth twisted between small fingers, stained with something that might have been tears or might have been blood. Who gave you bread? Miss Clara, 3 days ago, said I looked hungry. Where is she now? The child's grip tightened on the cloth. They found her this morning, down by Miller's Creek. Other folks on the porch had gone silent. The stranger noticed how they shifted their weight, how eyes found suddenly interesting spots on the ground. He crouched down to the child's level. What's your name? Sam. Sam what? Just Sam. The stranger glanced at the watching faces before focusing back on the child. You said she gave you her last bread. How do you know it was her last? Sam's voice cracked. Because she had nothing else. Her cupboards were empty. Everything was empty. But she tore off half her morning biscuit and put it in my hands anyway. Why were her cupboards empty? Same reason everyone's cupboards are empty. Same reason Mama cries when she thinks I'm sleeping. A woman on the porch cleared her throat loudly. Sam, you best be getting home before dark. The stranger stood slowly, studying the woman who'd spoken. She wore a clean dress and her hands looked soft. Not the hands of someone with empty cupboards. I'm asking the questions here, he said. You're not from around here, the woman replied. No, I'm not. Sam tugged at the stranger's shirt. Miss Clara said something before she gave me the bread. Said she wasn't going to be hungry much longer. Said none of us were. What did she mean? I think she knew they were coming for her. The stranger felt the weight of every stair on that porch. In the distance, a church bell chimed the hour, but it sounded more like a warning than a call to prayer. Who's they, Sam? The child looked toward the hills, where the big houses sat behind iron gates. Then back at the stranger's dust-covered boots, the ones who decide who eats. The stranger reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. The badge caught the afternoon light like a promise. Federal investigator. Name's Hayes. Sam stared at the badge. The porch went dead quiet, except for the creak of old wood settling. I need you to tell me everything about Miss Clara. Nothing to tell, the soft-handed woman called out. Poor thing just had a weak heart. Hayes didn't look away from Sam. Is that what happened? We can't. Sam's fingers worked the yellow cloth. She wasn't sick. Then what killed her? Mr. Hayes, another voice interrupted. An older man stepped forward, thumbs hooked in his suspenders. We appreciate federal interest, but this is a local matter. Child says otherwise. Sam whispered, they told everyone she fell in the creek. Said she hit her head on the rocks. But you don't think that's what happened. Miss Clara was scared of water. Never went near the creek. Said it reminded her of bad things. The soft-handed woman laughed nervously. Children have such imaginations. Hayes stood up, scanning the faces watching from doorways and porch rails. How many of you saw her body? Nobody answered. How many of you went to the funeral? More silence. When's the last time any of you talked to Clara? Sam looked up. They stopped talking to her weeks ago. All of them. Like she was already dead. Why? Because she started asking questions about the grain deliveries. About why families with hungry children weren't getting their fair share. The older man cleared his throat. Sam's been through a lot. Sometimes grief makes children say things. What kind of things? Sam's voice got smaller. Miss Clara found out where the extra grain was going. She found out about the lists. What lists? The ones that decide who gets food and who doesn't. She said she was going to tell someone. Someone important. Hayes felt the weight of the watching eyes. When was she going to tell? The day she died. The porch creaked as people shifted nervously. In the distance, dogs started barking like they sensed something wrong in the air. Who did she plan to tell, Sam? The child looked toward the hills again, then back at Hayes. You. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Sheriff Dalton sat behind a desk so clean it looked like it had never seen real work. His hands were smooth, pale, nothing like the weathered hands Hayes expected in farm country. Terrible thing about Clara Monroe. Dalton pulled out a thin file folder. Heart attack, most likely. Body was found face down in Miller's Creek. Child outside says she was afraid of water. Children say lots of things. Dalton opened the folder. Death certificate's already been filed. Natural causes. Hayes leaned forward. I'd like to see the coroner's report. Doc Henderson's been our coroner for 30 years. Never had a complaint. That's not what I asked. Dalton's smile tightened. Report says drowning. Secondary to cardiac event. Where's the autopsy? We don't do autopsies on every old woman who takes a tumble. Hayes studied the single sheet of paper in the folder. The handwriting was too neat, too perfect. This report was written today. Yesterday, actually. Clara died yesterday. That's right. Child says 3 days ago, Dalton shrugged. Kids lose track of time. Hayes noticed how the ink on the report was still dark, not faded like paperwork that had been sitting around. Tell me about the grain deliveries. What about them? Clara was asking questions about distribution lists. Clara Monroe was asking questions about a lot of things. Didn't make her popular. Popular enough to kill? Nobody killed anybody, Agent Hayes. Woman had a weak ticker and bad balance. Hayes stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see Sam sitting on the general store steps, still clutching that yellow cloth. Funny thing about drowning victims, they usually have water in their lungs. Doc Henderson found water in her lungs. Where's his report? I told you it's filed. I mean the actual medical examination. Blood work. Tissue samples. Dalton's clean hands drummed against the desk. This isn't the big city, Agent Hayes. We don't have fancy labs and equipment, but you do have missing grain shipments. Who told you that? Clara Monroe. Before she died, the drumming stopped. Clara Monroe never talked to any federal agents. She tried to. Hayes turned back from the window. Question is, who made sure she never got the chance? Hayes left the sheriff's office with more questions than answers. Sam was waiting by his truck, the yellow cloth now tucked into a small pocket. You want to see where she lived? Lead the way. They walked past houses with well-tended gardens and fresh paint toward the edge of town, where the roads turned to dirt. Clara's shack sat alone in a clearing, its walls gray with age and neglect. She used to have chickens, Sam said. Sold the last ones 2 months ago. The front door hung crooked on its hinges. Inside, the emptiness hit Hayes like a fist. Bare shelves lined the kitchen walls. The refrigerator hummed empty. Even the salt and pepper shakers sat hollow on a table, worn smooth by decades of use. This is how she lived. This is how lots of people live now. Hayes opened cabinet after cabinet. Nothing, not even crumbs. Where did she keep her paperwork? Sam pointed to a corner where a small desk sat under a window. Hayes pulled open the drawers one by one until his fingers found something taped to the underside of the bottom drawer. What is it? Hayes unfolded a stack of letters held together with string. The first envelope bore the seal of the county commissioner's office. He read the letter once, then again. What does it say? It says families who can't pay their protection fees don't get grain deliveries. Protection fees. Hayes held up another letter. $20 a month to stay on the distribution list. $50 if you want extra rations. Sam's eyes went wide. Miss Clara didn't have $20. Says here she was 3 months behind. Hayes found another envelope, this one with the sheriff's department letterhead. Says if she couldn't pay, she needed to stop asking questions about where the surplus grain was going. Where was it going? Hayes read the final letter in the stack. To families who could afford to pay double. The Hendersons, the Daltons, the Millers. Those are the richest families in town. They got richer by making sure poor folks stayed hungry. Hayes folded the letters carefully and put them in his jacket. Clara threatened that system by giving away her food, even when she didn't have any, especially then. Hayes looked around the empty shack one more time. Someone decided that kind of generosity was dangerous. The wind rattled the thin walls like bones. Hayes waited until midnight to move. Sam insisted on coming along, clutching a flashlight like a weapon. The grain elevator stood against the stars like a monument to hunger. Doors unlocked, Sam whispered. They slipped inside. Hayes's flashlight beams swept across mountains of grain sacks, more food than the entire town could eat in a year. Sam gasped. There's enough here to feed everyone. That's the point. Hayes read the shipping labels. Look at these dates. Grain's been sitting here for months. Footsteps echoed from the upper level. Hayes clicked off his light and pulled Sam behind a grain pile. 3 men descended the metal stairs, their voices carrying in the empty space. Federal. Agents asking too many questions. Sheriff. Dalton's voice should have handled Clara. Quieter. A second voice. Hayes didn't recognize. She was teaching other families to share what little they had, the third man said, making them think they didn't need our system. Hayes peered around the grain sacks. Commissioner Henderson and Mayor Miller stood with Dalton. All 3 men Hayes had seen around town wearing clean clothes and well-fed faces. One woman giving away bread shouldn't have scared you, Dalton said. It wasn't just bread, Henderson replied. She was organizing them, teaching them that generosity could break our control. Control of what? Everything. Miller's voice was cold. Hungry people don't ask questions. They take what they're given and stay grateful. Clara was making them dangerous. Hayes stepped into the light, gun drawn. So you killed her, the 3 men froze. Sam emerged behind Hayes, flashlight beam catching their guilty faces. Agent Hayes, Dalton said slowly. You're trespassing. You're murdering. Clara Monroe drowned after you held her head underwater. Hayes kept his gun steady. Because she threatened your starvation economy. Henderson laughed bitterly. You think this is about money? What else? Power. Hungry people are compliant people. Clara was teaching them they could survive without us. By sharing. By caring for each other instead of begging us for scraps. Sam's young voice cut through the tension. She gave me her last bread because she knew you were coming for her. Miller's face twisted. That woman signed her own death warrant the day she chose kindness over survival. Hayes kept his gun trained on the 3 men, while Sam's flashlight beam held them frozen like insects under glass. The grain elevator felt heavy with secrets finally spoken aloud. Sam, go get help. Who can I trust? Everyone who's hungry. Sam ran toward the door, footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Hayes heard the child's voice calling out into the night, yelling for people to come, to see what was hidden in their own grain elevator. Within minutes, families emerged from their houses. Thin faces appeared in the doorway, eyes widening at the mountains of grain that could have fed their children for months. Martha, look at all this food, a woman's voice called out. Been telling us there wasn't enough, an old man said. More voices joined in as the crowd grew larger. Hayes watched the 3 conspirators shrink back against the grain sacks as hungry families pressed forward. You killed Clara for this? The soft-handed woman from the general store porch stood in the doorway, but her voice had turned hard as iron. She was disrupting the natural order, Henderson said weakly. Natural order? Her young mother stepped forward, baby on her hip. Watching my child cry from hunger while you hoarded grain? Sam climbed onto a grain sack so everyone could see. Miss Clara gave me her last bread 3 days ago. Split her only biscuit in half because she said nobody should go hungry alone. That's what got her killed, Dalton muttered. No, Sam's voice rang clear. That's what's going to save us. The crowd murmured agreement. Hayes watched something shift in their faces. Fear giving way to anger. Anger giving way to something stronger. Clara showed us. We don't need your permission to care for each other, the young mother said. We can share what we have, the old man added. Like she did. Hayes holstered his gun as federal backup arrived, drawn by Sam's calls. The 3 men were led away in handcuffs, but the real transformation was happening in the faces of the families surrounding the grain. What happens now? Sam asked. Hayes looked around at the community Clara's sacrifice had awakened. Now you do what she taught you. You break bread together. Sam pulled out the yellow cloth, smoothing it carefully. She tore this from her dress to wrap the biscuit. So I'd remember. Remember what? That love shared is never wasted. The grain elevator doors stood open wide, and for the first time in months, hungry families walked out with full hands. Sam knelt between rows of tomato plants where the grain elevator used to stand. The federal demolition crew had left the ground torn and scarred, but 6 months of community hands had turned it into something alive. Carrots are coming in good this year. Martha's voice came from the next row over. The same woman who'd sat silent on the general store porch now worked alongside families she'd once ignored. Clara would have loved this, Sam said, brushing dirt from a handful of radishes. She did love this. That's why we're here. Sam stood up, no longer the hollow-eyed child who'd clutched torn cloth and spoke of last bread. The yellow fabric was still there, tied around Sam's wrist like a promise, but the eyes above it were bright with purpose. Agent Hayes sent another letter, Martha said. Trial starts next month. All three of them. All three. Henderson, Miller, Dalton? Federal charges. Sam nodded and kept working. Hayes had moved on to other towns, other conspiracies, but his investigation had given them something more valuable than justice. It had given them proof that they could survive without the systems designed to keep them desperate. Dinner's at 5 tonight, called Mrs. Patterson from the Bean Rows. Everyone's bringing something, even the Hendersons. Especially the Hendersons. Their boy's been hungry too. That was the thing Clara's sacrifice had taught them. Hunger didn't pick sides. Fear didn't care about your last name or the size of your house. When one family shared what little they had, it reminded others they could do the same. Sam pulled the yellow cloth from around the wrist and held it up to catch the afternoon sun. The fabric was faded now, worn soft by months of washing and careful handling. "What are you thinking about?" Martha asked. About how she knew. Knew what? That her last bread wouldn't really be her last. Sam tucked the cloth back into place and reached for another plant. Every meal we share together, every family we feed, that's her bread too. The garden stretched green and growing where the monument to hoarding used to stand, and Sam smiled at the simple mathematics of love multiplied through open hands.